11 o'clock on your Wednesday morning. Welcome in. It's the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you here. A lot of things to get to over the course of the next hour. Of course, Jeremiah Denotti, the new athletic director for South Carolina, spoke yesterday with Joe. We're really going to dive into some of the stuff that he said coming up here in a couple minutes. But, guys, we, of course, have to continue to address the elephant of the room of South Carolina men's basketball still searching for that first conference win. And unfortunately, guys, last night falling to 0-8 in conference play, this time to a Georgia team that was coming in on their own four-game losing streak as Coach Paris and company now dropped below 500 for the first time the first time this season since losing to North Florida at the beginning of the year. And Chris, you keep trying to find that silver lining, and unfortunately, it's not showing up yet.
Yeah, and I think, guys, this is Lamont Paris is a very even keel guy. And to his credit, I think that's both, when the team has had success, which we saw a lot of last season, and we've seen a little bit this season, and when they haven't, right? And this season's certainly been a struggle. I mean, Jeremiah Donati on the program with Jay and Elijah, I think he put it quite well when you look at the women's and men's teams this year. It's been a tale of two seasons, right? And yes, you've had the injuries. You do have Jamari Thomas back, but for a stretch, you didn't have Jamari Thomas or Miles Studi. You're still without Studi. And it just seems like they've had some plays that didn't go their way. But I think when you really look at this team, there's just a lot of missed opportunity, right? And the turnovers are once again reared their ugly head. 17 of them last night, I think, was the number. Digging yourself holes when you make a run almost immediately at the worst possible time, turning the ball over, making a bad play. To me, it looked like they kind of got into a hole and pressed some last night, right? And Lamont Paris is very much, I think, a player's coach. And he's very cerebral. But I think even he's having a hard time with some of this. I mean, he even said last night, I'm at a loss for words to some degree, right? And we know that South Carolina, Thomas has given them a spark since he's been back in some ways, but they've had issues handling the ball. And Paris, to me, Wes, seems kind of frustrated by, he mentioned Jacoby Wright stepping up and being more aggressive. And I think he's never been one to pass the buck and say, well, we're doing everything we can. It's up to the players, right? But I do sense that he is more than a sense.
It's got to be frustrating, and I don't know what end is more frustrating to maybe some of those games where you really should have won and just found a way to lose at the end, or the games like last night, which, it's an 11-point game. That's really not what you would call just a complete blowout if you just saw the score, but it just really, to me, felt like South Carolina could never truly just close the gap in this game. Georgia was up from the very beginning, and a lot of that was spurred again by turnovers. South Carolina, I think, had essentially 5 giveaways in the first 5 minutes, basically, of the game. So you're on the road, you're behind the 8 ball from the very jump, and it just felt like every time South Carolina chipped away a little bit, something would happen and the lead would get extended again. So it just never really felt particularly close to me. Again, 7 turnovers in this game. You look at one thing statistically that kind of just catches your eye as well is the disparity between the three-point percentage for both teams. Georgia hitting almost 47%, South Carolina hitting 23.5%, just 4 for 17 from behind the arc. If you're going to turn the ball over the way they did, you have to make up for it somewhere else, and maybe you have a great night shooting, maybe you have a great night getting second chance points. You have to find a different way to make that up. South Carolina did not. Again, just going off the box score here too, 11 second chance points for Georgia, just 3 for South Carolina. So I can't imagine internally the level of frustration that it probably brings. And these guys, obviously, we've seen they can compete, against great teams, but at some point, when you're just not winning the games and it's this many in a row, I can see why Lamont Paris is sort of at a loss for words at this point.
Well, and you do wonder, and again, they have been competitive in most of these games they've lost, and I thought they showed good fight last night as well. You do kind of wonder at what point do you just ultimately kind of roll over knowing the season is pretty much lost and just kind of go through the motions to close it out, because last night you closed out a winless month of January. You've now fallen below 500 this season, which, again, if you're going to get above that, you're going to be treading water the entire rest of the year trying to fight to keep your head above it, which probably is not going to happen. You got 4 more ranked opponents coming up over the next 2 weeks or so. So it just doesn't, you don't see, again, that light at the end of the tunnel, unfortunately. And we're not trying to be negative about the team, but they're not giving us enough to spin positive with not being able to close these games out. And again, the fundamentals of turnovers killing you in pretty much all these games that you're losing, unfortunately.
And I would say a couple of things there. I think it's okay to point out, and it's really not spin to say, hey, this team's competed against not just some teams, but some really good teams. I mean, Paris talked about that last night. That is a reality. You can't really put lipstick on an 0-9 conference start anyway, right? But even if you were trying to go just completely negative and say this team has been, not even competitive, like that's not true either, right? They just have not closed out any of those games, and they've let some get a little out of control. The Oklahoma game, of course, at the end, the 2 games to, Mississippi State, Bama to begin SEC play. They've largely been competitive in the other ones, but that doesn't matter in terms of the actual win-loss record, which is where you have wanted to get over the hump. And I also don't think that, you pointed this out, Tyler. We saw a fight from this team. I think it's a bunch of proud guys, and I'm sure they're incredibly frustrated. I don't think we see this team, give up or look disinterested. I've caught none of that. I remember there was that Missouri team a few years ago. I think it was Quanzo Martin's last team. They came into Colonial Life Arena and they were not a good team, and they cared, and I think this team cares. Just because things aren't going your way, do some teams fold? Yeah. But I don't see that from this Paris team. I didn't see it with this first team that, had some struggles, had some deficiencies. This team clearly has had some deficiencies, but they've stayed competitive. And I really think we'll probably, if I had to guess, I think we'll continue to see that throughout the year. I think the frustrations are spilling over more into, maybe decision-making. I do think the team pressed a little bit last night. And I think when you do that, you're trying to manufacture a result, you get some turnovers. It was weird because it was a combination of, sometimes they'd make plays and I'm like, they're pressing. And then at other times it seemed like Lamont Paris wanted them to be more aggressive, right? We went into this season talking about kind of having a debate. Who will they miss most? Will it be, Cooper? Will it be Mack? Will it be Michie Johnson? And I think we've seen spurts where you can make a case for any of them. It seems like, given the guard issues, point guard, ball handling, Cooper is probably the best bet. But Paris referenced last night, hey, guys got to realize that it's not just going to be, okay, here's Michie making a play. Wes, you were always fond of saying Carolina would frequently have these Michie Johnson go-off games. You don't have that anymore, right? That's not an option for you. And so when it comes to somebody like Jacoby Wright, be more aggressive. But even with those absences, we've seen this team be competitive. They just haven't been able to put it together.
I want to get your thoughts as well on the Love Chevrolet phone line, 803-404-6100. John wants to weigh in on what happened last night with the men's basketball. John, appreciate your call. What's on your mind today?
Hey, thanks for the call, or thanks for the time. Appreciate it. A couple big sort of thoughts. Number one, who is surprised? I get last year it's typical Carolina. You sort of catch lightning in a bottle. You have a backcourt that's very seasoned and very good. You had a little bit of a lightning in a bottle of CMB as a freshman. But the coaching is just terrible. You got Pringle, who hasn't lived up. Cam Scott, the worst 5-star in history. you watch the game, and you got CMB starting the offense 40 feet from the basket. The other night, they're getting blown by on dribble drives, and he doesn't even go to the zone for stretches. I mean, what's the deal? Like, why does everyone think that Lamont is such a great coach? I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah, I appreciate the call there, John. 803-404-6100. There are certainly things that are being questioned about this team. Again, Colin Murray-Boyle's role in this offense and where they're putting him at. I don't think we can write off Cam Scott yet. He's certainly maybe not performed where some people thought he would in his true freshman season. To this point, there's still room for improvement and growth, and some of that does fall in the coaching. You do have the pieces that you have based on what you went out and got in the transfer portal, but I'm not ready to throw Lamont Paris, out into the trash heap necessarily. You know what I mean? So definitely a tough season so far, but it is what it is at this point.
Yeah, and I mean, Cam was highly recruited, don't get me wrong, but he was also, he was a 4-star. He was not a 5-star. He was not supposed to be maybe what Gigi was supposed to be when he first arrived, you know. So I'm not giving up on Cam either. Now, admittedly, we can make our points without exaggerating it. Admittedly, Cam, I thought he would be able to make more of an impact at this point. And I think, frankly, Lamont Paris probably did too. There was talk preseason about, he thought Cam was going to be a freshman all-SEC guy for sure. And so, I think the expectations were there for him to be able to come in and play early. We're putting together this team. Your thought process was, all right, yes, they have to replace a lot of minutes, but you thought a big jump from CMB, Pringle in a bigger role and back home. You thought Jamari Thomas coming in and filling the point guard role, and then you basically thought you were going to get a jump from everybody who played last year and was coming back this year, and you thought, frankly, Cam Scott was going to be plugged right in there kind of as an impact wing. And so when you have questions coming into a season, and let's talk about football. Remember how many questions we sort of had, but how many of them at the end of the year got answered to the positive, and you had a special year. In basketball, pretty much all the if this guy can make a jump, if that guy can make an impact, pretty much all of those went the other direction for this basketball team. So it's a situation there where you when all those things go negative, you have this result.
Yeah, and again, next opportunity to get a win coming up Saturday night against Texas A&M over at Colonial Life Arena, 8:30 game, which you'll be able to listen to right here on The Game. Yesterday, new athletic director Jeremiah Donati spoke with Jay and Elijah on the post-game show. We'll dive into some of the things that he had to say about revenue sharing, NIL, and everything else going on around South Carolina athletics. Coming up next is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs here on The Game.
All right, guys, shout out to our friends, as always, at Firehouse Subs, your presenting sponsor of this show, firehousesubs.com, or the app is the absolute best way you can get that rapid rescue to go as lunchtime quickly approaches. Avoid the wait. Order online. We were at a great time yesterday at the Forest Drive locations of Firehouse Subs, and the great thing about it, whether you're there, whether you're in other parts of the Midlands, no doubt there's a Firehouse Subs location near you. Go check them out for lunch. If you want to try something new, Do what we did. Get this new French dip. Delicious with premium roast beef loaded with caramelized onions, melted Swiss and provolone cheese, and topped with Italian seasoning, all on a toasted garlic bread roll, served, of course, with hot au jus for dipping. If you want to try something new, try that. But, of course, you all got your favorites at Firehouse Subs. Order it right now. Again, hit that rapid rescue to go, firehousesubs.com, or on the app.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris along with you here on your Wednesday on the game. I want to get into what Jeremiah Donati had to say yesterday on the post-game show with Jay and Elijah. He talked about a number of things going on with Gamecock athletics, especially pertaining to the new era of college sports we're on the cusp of with revenue sharing and everything, and I think that's a good place to start. Now, this is a longer clip. It may not play the entire thing, but I just want to kind of everyone get kind of the gist of what he's talking about here when it comes to his comfortability on where things stand in general and with South Carolina on the upcoming revenue sharing that's set to be rolled out this upcoming fall.
Well, as it relates to the House case settlement, I mean, we are operationalizing the department for what it looks like the next 5 to 10 years. And, you know, I'd be lying to you if I told you we didn't have more work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And so we're kind of building the plane as we're flying it. And that's not, you know, an issue.
You're not alone in that
unique
respect.
Or germane to USC. That's every school, whether you're in the SEC or the Big 12, the ACC or the Big 10. Everyone's going through the same thing. So
right.
I'm not saying we're we're far behind other schools. We're building this, in real time. And I like how it's looking. It's not without additional expense. There are some from a contracted, like one of the things just very basic operationally, we need to identify people that are, if you just said for a second, let's just assume, and I'm sure we'll talk about revenue distributions in a moment. You saw the news from the Department of Education. We're going to probably be paying student athletes in 4 sports. Let's just make that assumption. And so that's probably 125 to 150 student athletes. We need people in the department that are negotiating with agents and families. We need people that are writing these contracts, administering these contracts, balancing and supporting a cap management system, and ultimately submitting this through the SEC as part of terms of the settlement. So there's a lot of things that that we just don't have people right now that are doing those. And so whether those are new bodies or new job functions, those are things I need to we are spending a lot of time to make sure we're building for the future. So,
and again, that's just a little segment of a very well expanded answer. And again, you can go back and listen to the entire interview on our podcasting page on 1075thegame.com. But Chris, I know you were especially interested to come in here and talk about this in terms of what you just heard in those basically 90 seconds from Donati yesterday. What stands out to you the most?
Well, I think the quote that he used was, building the plane as you fly it. And if you think, well, that sounds pretty dangerous, it is. That's how everybody's having to operate, right? And we've talked about this a lot. We've got to have some type of structure because we can't continue saying, all right, here are maybe some rules, kind of, sort of, and then we'll let you know when they change, because the change is going to be based on whatever happened in court today, right? We have been running college sports on the backs of litigation, and that's not a place you want to be. But there are just a lot of questions that haven't been answered, and it's not, as Jeremiah Donati said there, it's not just at South Carolina. It's not just, well, why don't we figure it out? It's everybody. It's the commissioners of every Power 4 conference and Group of 5 conference. It's everybody who runs a collective. It's agents. I talk to people every day in these spaces, and they're all kind of in scramble mode because they don't really know what it looks like. And so I do think one of the things that's evident, and Donati touched on it, they're going to have to add some personnel in the athletic department to be able to handle some of these tasks. Things like, he mentioned wanting to have some people in-house that can negotiate contracts when revenue sharing comes along with athletes, their families, agents. That's kind of, in my mind, that's like kind of a tough thing to find. It's a tough archetype to find somebody who has some knowledge of recruiting and has those relationships, but also has contract background. I don't think you can just, hey, let's just plug in this attorney into a spot like that. So finding people that can do that. Your compliance, department probably has to be built out even more. And he shouted out Hillary Cox for her work with NIL and compliance so far. But you've got to have people that can, manage a revenue sharing cap and be able to report back to the conference or whatever structure we have. So, he also mentioned later that they've got to go above the cap, right? So you've got your $20 million or so of revenue sharing. How can you generate funding for NIL outside of that? And he mentioned a few different options. So, just that was my biggest takeaway is obviously he's thinking about it, but there's so much that we don't know yet because we haven't been given. College football, college athletics is still kind of scrambling, figuring out what everything's going to look like.
Yeah, and my additional thought there, Chris, too, was the fact of, all right, even if we figure this thing out now, I know everybody involved in that space would love for there to actually be some long-term agreement on what this thing may look like. Like even if some of the current agreements go through, you're talking about, this is something Donati brought up, you're talking about it being potentially a 10-year deal. So what happens in 10 years? So I think I don't know if anybody has all the answers, but I know everybody is hoping for some actual just not that there can't be tweaks and changes along the way. That's called progress. You're going to always have changes, but they've got to figure out a way to get the fact that you're just going to be sued into oblivion every single time somebody else comes up with a new idea to attack you, basically. And so I think I actually loved his analogy, building the plane while we're flying. Like, hopefully you have a parachute as well, because it's a tough situation for everybody to be in. Now luckily, there's a lot of dollars to go around. Like, do you have to keep finding ways to amplify that and build new revenue streams? Of course, that's what everybody's trying to do. But guys, I got to be honest, it was a little bit of a, holy, moment for me when I saw that Ohio State is in the negative. Like, your national champion in football
by a lot
is deeply in the negative for that fiscal year.
Yeah.
Was that a little bit of a, Chris, was that a little bit of a, like, wait, what moment for you?
It's very jarring, and I think that's something Donati's cognizant of. I think we'll get into a little bit more of some of his ideas on, he talked about basketball, for instance. Maybe we'll get into that a little bit, and just kind of like the women's game, some of the new revenue streams opening up with the TV deal. So yeah, you got to be cognizant of it, right? You talked about that with Williams-Brice. And that kind of leads me to one more quick point here. He, gave the analogy when he worked for Lee Steinberg, who, of course, was the inspiration behind Jerry Maguire. They had an all-pro running back. Don't know who it was. He didn't say, who signed a deal. Now, this was 14 years ago, but just go ahead and apply whatever inflation percentage to this number. $50,000 with Nike, which is the biggest sports brand in the world, I would say, and certainly was at the time, and had to go do all sorts of stuff. The numbers in NIL, a lot of people like to go around saying all the NIL numbers are fake. A lot of them aren't. Like, these numbers are big, and they don't seem sustainable. Now, at the same time, we keep saying they're not sustainable, and the bubble hasn't burst. Will it at some point? I don't know. Maybe. Certainly, when you're looking at just the cap, you can't afford to pay what's being paid right now within the structure of a revenue sharing cap. That's going to make it very, very difficult to manage, and that's why you have to go above. But will some of the numbers become lower? Will they become more reasonable? People love pointing out, hey, Carson Beck's making more than whoever. Like, if Will Levis was like, I want to go back to Kentucky, he can make more at Kentucky than he's making in the NFL right now. It seems kind of weird. And so that's another part of all this, to continue figuring out, is what will the numbers look like? Will they settle down a little bit? That's a concern for everybody.
We'll get Donati's expanded thoughts on that coming up on the other side as we continue to explore his conversation with Jay and Elijah yesterday on the post-game show as the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs rolls along on your Wednesday here on The Game.
All right, guys, let me tell you about our friends over at, if you want to learn more about them, head to classicroofingsc.com or just go ahead and give them a call, 803-590-7870. They're probably somewhere in the Midlands right now checking out someone out there's outstanding new roof, or maybe they're checking out the roof that's been on your home for a long time. Maybe you need a free estimate. That's what we did. We got them out. They're going to get up on your roof. They're going to put the drone up there, too. They're going to take an in-depth look at your roof, and they're going to let you know, hey, are there some issues I maybe need to be aware of right now? Are there some small fixes that need to take place now? And then most importantly, what is the life of this roof moving forward? Of course, you want to go ahead and plan for any changes on that roof, and our friends at Classic Roofing, they can help you with that every single step of the way with quality craftsmanship and great customer service. Again, it's classicroofingsc.com and 803-590-7870.
And welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, Wes, and Chris along with you on your Wednesday. Continue to break down what Jeremiah Donati had to say yesterday on the postgame show with Jay and Elijah, giving his thoughts and everything going on with the current structure of college sports and how it relates back here to, of course, the University of South Carolina. And Chris touched on one of the examples he brought up in reference to NIL and kind of where it's going. I want to let you hear the entire answer he gave around that example that he used about the running back from all those years ago. Here is what Jeremiah Donati had to say about NIL yesterday.
We've got a group that's helping us operationalize the House case response. Part of that's revenue share, but part of it's real NIL post July 1. And it's probably not one answer. There's probably a few different solutions. It's going to be difficult. I used to work on the NFL agency side, and when I worked for Lee Steinberg, one of our clients, one of Lee's clients, was an all-pro running back. And he had a deal with Nike that I remember was $50,000 annually. And this particular running back had to do all these things for the. Now, granted, this is 14 years ago, but it's not. And so I use that as context to say that if these deals are truly fair market value, the numbers we're seeing right now won't survive. They won't survive scrutiny, because that deal required this guy to fly all over the country for real commercials and that type of thing. It was $50,000. So we're talking about linebackers and running backs that are getting $600,000-$800,000 deals. And if you want to burn up some of your revenue share inside the cap for that, that's the institutional's decision. But to find an $800,000 real NIL deal that passes scrutiny, I'm telling you, they're very, very, very few and far between. Other than a Heisman Trophy caliber player, they just don't exist, and they certainly don't exist for offensive linemen or that type of thing. So that'll be some kind of hard industry set, assuming the letter of the law comes that the settlement's written on, assuming those things do become enforceable. Right. There's just you just won't see the same numbers, but it is going to be important to have NIL deals that go above the cap. And so we're looking at a number of solutions, from internal people to expanding our partnership with Learfield or our multimedia rights holders to outside entities. And so we'll have kind of what's starting to look like a multi-pronged approach to do that. And we'll have to turn up the heat on those people to make sure that they're delivering those.
And Wes, we've talked about it with Jeremy, we've talked about it with Mark. We know NIL is still going to exist in this new era. What exactly it looks like, we don't know 100% with certainty, but hearing Donati yesterday talk about these deals come back down to earth a little bit. And again, you're still going to have the opportunity to expand on whatever these athletes are going to be making from the revenue sharing from the schools and that $20.5 million. So yeah, the quarterback like a Sellers is probably going to be able to leverage more money outside of that. And, superstar players like a Nick Harbor, whoever it may be, can get additional stuff, but it may not be the 7 and 8 million stuff we're seeing getting thrown at quarterbacks right now, because you're going to have, like you said, that market value to kind of assess things across the board instead of kind of, at this point, blindly speculating on what others might be making.
Yeah, and so you have confirmation there, what we kind of already knew, and that is that, like, I think probably all SEC schools, probably most of them at least, South Carolina, will be looking for ways to, obviously, can you find what you would term are real NIL deals outside of that cap number? And, I think the interesting thing there that I took away, he talked about surviving scrutiny, and will it be, I guess, will it be policed to the letter of the law? And how much wiggle room will there be? And who's to say what an NIL deal is actually worth? At some point, if you want to get very, 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 I guess, out there, something is worth what somebody's willing to pay. So I do think you're still going to even have some issues, I believe, in policing this current, what we think is going to be the current plan. Now, moving forward, if that's what everybody agrees to, then that will be the rules, and that's that. But I think in some ways, Chris, you tell me what you think. In some ways, so you're more, let's just say, valuable players to your roster, to your team, to your football program in general. They in some ways would command obviously a higher percentage, you would think, of your revenue share. However, those players also are actually the ones that could actually command much bigger, what you would call true NIL deals on just the marketing side of things. So if anything, I think you have to find some ways to sort of maybe move some of those guys off of your revenue share books and take as much advantage as you possibly can in getting those real NIL deals, because those do not count towards your cap. However, Chris, again, all this involves a lot of man hours for people actually going out and chasing those deals. And also, where is the true line in terms of the scrutiny of this counts as we're going to accept this NIL deal, but we're not going to accept that NIL deal?
Yeah, my prediction is that if we don't have some type of bargaining, that this thing they'll get anybody trying to determine fair market value through like a third party, again, outside of like a collective bargaining or something like that. Because if you do that, then you can have actual structure. But if we don't have that, they're going to get sued into oblivion, I think, just like they have been. You've got like a consultant firm like Deloitte, who has been, I don't know if it's been actually reported or just strongly rumored or understood that they're going to come in and say, hey, we're determining fair market value. They've even admitted that's very hard to do in some of their writings. And then you've also got Deloitte being contracted by individual schools, which kind of seems like a conflict of interest. But nonetheless, if I actually saw this doing a little bit of research on Twitter, somebody saying, hey, if you can have the same movie role, and if you hire a B-list actor, he might get paid this. If you hire Tom Cruise, he's going to get paid a lot more, right? And the fair market value is what you want to pay. Tom Cruise could come say, well, I've done Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, and I've done all these different movies, right? So but the value, as you said, Wes, is kind of in the eye of the beholder. And so good luck having a third party agency or consultancy coming along and saying, well, actually, tight end A, we only think you should get 150, not 200. That's not fair market value. Okay, you're going to get sued, and so again, outside of a collective bargaining or similar type of arrangement. So I think a lot of people are kind of hoping for fair market value, and maybe it does happen in some kind of structure, but it's hard. I agree with Donati in that, yeah, like what you're seeing isn't true NIL for the most part. It's pay for play. We'll have to see we just got to stop pretending. But I do think, in going outside the cap, having people, and Donati talked about this too, whether it's like extending a partnership with Learfield, multimedia rights company, whether it's internal people, external people, it will become more important, I think, for athletes and schools to be able to have partnerships that can drive some kind of true NIL brand deals, especially if we get into more structure. I think that will become more important.
We'll wrap up the hour, kind of talk about some of the other things he had to say as more relates specifically to South Carolina when it comes to some of the sports and other revenue options here around the Columbia area. We'll have that coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Wednesday here on The Game. Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler West and Chris wrapping up Wednesday's edition of the show. Again, we're all going to be out tomorrow at Pro Swing for their first annual Pro Swing Golf Classic, tomorrow and Friday, by the way. So if you've signed up, you'll be able to see us out there. Again, entire crew is going to be out there from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. on both days. As we wrap up the hour here, again, Jeremiah Donati got into a lot of different things on the post-game show yesterday with Jay and Elijah, and you can listen to the whole conversation on our podcasting page on 1075thegame.com. But as we kind of relate things back a little more locally here to South Carolina, also spoke on the stadium upgrades as well. Of course, that's something that was really kind of rolling in place before he got here. He's now being handed over the reins of this project that we know is going to take some time, going to take a couple of years to really see to fruition. But as we talked about yesterday, or he talked about yesterday, and as we know, the idea to upgrade the suites and everything to generate more revenue in an area that South Carolina had fallen behind compared to other schools in the SEC, Wes.
Yeah, and I think, guys, for Williams-Brice Stadium and the upgrades is, I think, twofold. One, of course, anytime you're upgrading your facility, and this is your number one facility, this is where you play football, this is what everybody thinks of when they think of your university, I feel like, from an athletic standpoint. You, of course, want to upgrade the fan experience. You want to upgrade the looks. You want to upgrade the amenities. You want for everybody to look at your stadium and be impressed with it. But for South Carolina, the other side of that is, of course, can you add additional revenue? And I really actually, guys, liked how Jeremiah Donati put it. And it was, hey, we know this is a current situation where it's a challenge. It's a perceived negative. Maybe not even a perceived negative. It is a negative that you only have what you would call 18 like true suites in terms of generating revenue. Well, as we talked about when this is first announced, this phase one, basically I looked at it as this is step one of phase one is what was announced in October. And that was that South Carolina is taking those initial steps to try and ultimately this first phase could get you from 18 to 36. You could eventually be up to, and we'll see exactly what these plans ends up being. It was still very, very early in the process, but potentially get up to 83 premium suites. The median among SEC football stadiums being 90. So gives you an idea. You're way, 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 way off right now in terms of those offerings for your fans. But Chris, Donati's point is that, hey, we got to create more revenue. Nobody else has more room in their stadium than South Carolina does right now to add more suites because there aren't any there already for the most part. You have a wide variety of different directions you could take your next moves. That doesn't mean it's complete blank canvas. You obviously have the current structure of the stadium to work around. However, it does give you some opportunities to get creative with what you might want to add to Willie B.
Yeah, Donati seems very excited about the stadium projects. I think it's hard to loop it into just one, right? Because you've got kind of the short term of, addressing one side of the stadium and putting in, more suites. But he also used the word holistic, right? Like, I think that's something to get across to fans, in that while there's going to be some short-term improvements with premium seating and things like that, everybody has an appetite, it seems like, to address the entirety of the stadium, the entirety of the fan experience, to where, if you're sitting in, the upper deck, for instance, as opposed to the 200 level premium suites, you're still going to have some opportunities to improve your experience at Williams-Brice Stadium. But I think he's also excited just long term when you're thinking about revenue, right? It is, in some ways, not having an on-campus stadium for South Carolina is, not the greatest thing in the world. I'm reminded of that. Like, if you travel to an away game, you're like, man, it's really cool to have an on-campus stadium. At the same time, it very uniquely positions South Carolina in an era that we're in right now, where it's massively helpful to have advantages. And look, some schools have built-in advantages because of past history. You think of a school like Texas, right? You think of, I mean, you mentioned Wes earlier, Ohio State, great athletic department, great base of people, just won the national championship, operated at a deficit. So everybody's having this trouble, even the blue blood type schools. For South Carolina, nobody's going to trip over, something and strike oil. But to have a potential cash cow like the area around Williams-Brice Stadium, not even talking about just adding revenue through premium seats, but if we start talking about the kind of stadium project around there, that area, the potential for massive revenue generation from that, that should be really exciting to everyone. And I think it was very exciting and appealing for Jeremiah Donati in taking this job too.
Yeah, me personally, Chris, and I think maybe I can speak for a lot of Gamecock fans as well out there, that's probably one of the most, I would say, long-term projects that has the most interest of the fan base in general, is what can you do with what is in some ways a blank canvas out there in terms of making it something that can generate revenue, but also making it something that can be really unique for South Carolina and that could be something that gives you a leg up on the rest of your college football peers. And also, I think there's quite a bit of pressure in making sure that you get this right, because in theory, that could transform that area, not just 10 years, you're talking 50 years into the future. But I think it's important that it's done right, because you don't want to have all these projects and then whatever businesses are in there not be successful, and then you got a bunch of empty buildings around your stadium either.
Well, in this project, I know, again, the ball started rolling before I got here, but it's going to be something that's going to define his era as an athletic director here, however long that is. Again, whatever they end up building down by the stadium is going to be there for decades and decades, and it's always going to be remembered to have been built over the course of the Jeremiah Donati era. So, again, got to make sure it's right, and that's going to be one of the things that people are going to remember you by years and years down the line.
Yeah, and I get the feeling, that's definitely a little bit more, I don't want to say on the back burner, but right now it feels like moving forward with this phase one of Williams-Brice and putting together plans and getting the architect part done is kind of on the forefront. Interesting to me, guys, I know we got to get out of here. Donati was not asked about Williams-Brice Stadium. He brought it up. Yep. So that was definitely, as he said, top of mind for him.
Definitely so. And again, the full conversation on our podcasting page on 1075thegame.com. We'll be out at Pro Swing tomorrow. Hope to see all of you out there for the first annual Pro Swing Golf Classic. Halftime show of myself, Terry Ford, coming up next here on your Wednesday on the Game.
All right, guys, tomorrow's Gamecock Club Hour, presented by our friends at Krantz Cooling and Heating, will feature none other than our guy, Kason Henry, South Carolina starting offensive tackle. That show brought to you again by our friends at Krantz Cooling. That's Krantz with a K, Cooling with a K. If you need more information or if you need to schedule an appointment, head to krantzcooling.com or just give them a call, 803-672-3224. If you go to that website, you will see the schedule an appointment button right at the top in red. Hopefully you don't need an appointment. Hopefully you're not having issues right now. But if you are, they're going to take outstanding care of you, just like they have my guy Chris Clark. They've been out at his home. Let them come out to your home. And if you're not having issues, go ahead and gain that peace of mind by knowing that your home's heating and cooling system will receive regular professional attention from the Krantz Cooling and Heating team, with a maintenance plan to make sure you're covered on all those areas. Again, that's Krantz Cooling, krantzcooling.com, 803-672-3224.